armed interventions and armed resistances in Afghanistan. So that brings me to Ali Maisam Nazary. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, the head of the foreign relations of the National Resistance Front, one of its most articulate spokespeople today, who's regularly reminding the world that this is not done. That the Taliban is not, it's not a fait accompli in Afghanistan, and that there are many reasons for the world to question everything that we are seeing in Afghanistan when it comes to this talk about a kind of stability for the moment in Afghanistan. And I think Ambassador Mukhopadhyay referred to that as well. May I ask you to give us your view of how successful do you think the National Resistance Front has even been in these 3 months of trying to project to the world that they mustn't just get used to a status quo in Afghanistan? How successful do you think your movement has been, and where do you see the possibilities of taking this forward, given the situation, given the Taliban's comfort levels in Afghanistan at present?
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be part of this discussion today, and with all the esteemed personalities of both India and Afghanistan. It's a wonderful opportunity that has been given to us to express our views on the way forward and possible solutions to the current mess that has unfolded in Afghanistan. Before answering your question, I would like to start a bit with the why we started the resistance. This is a question that I've been asked many times, and I believe Mrs. Najibullah also commented on the feasibility of a successful resistance that could solve the problems of Afghanistan. So for the past few years, we've been studying the crisis in our country, the conflict, the unending conflict that we've not only experienced in the past 40 years, but we see a pattern of conflict for the past few centuries in Afghanistan. And so we've always had a power vacuum throughout the throughout Afghanistan's history, and except for around 40 years of stability during Zahir Shah's reign, there has always been a conflict in Afghanistan and violence in one part of, or if it wasn't throughout the country, at least there was violence and armed conflict in a few places. For the past few years, we tried sincerely to reach out to the Taliban to reach a political settlement that is acceptable to all of Afghanistan's communities, that could ensure the rights and freedom of all citizens, and that could finally solve Afghanistan's problems and the crises that has always caused instability in Afghanistan, the factors that have caused instability in Afghanistan. However, we did not see the sort of sincerity that we had from the other side, and their narrative was a narrative of dominance. They used religion and other means to justify their narrative of dominance. And after the fall of Kabul, for around 10 days, the National Resistance Front did reach out, and we had informal discussions with them, and we had negotiations. But we did not see a route that without violence, without resistance, peace in Afghanistan, stability in Afghanistan would be possible. Reconciliation in Afghanistan would be possible. They did not have they did not show goodwill when it came to negotiating on Afghanistan's future. When we did discuss forming a power structure, a political system that is acceptable to all. They did not show any interest. The only interest they had is terms of surrender, a way to incorporate other political forces in a system where they are dominant, and for others to only be tokens. And the National Resistance Front, we do not believe that inclusivity is for a few political figures to be in a government, to have a few ministries, directorates, or embassies, and to consider that as a government, as an inclusive government in a country like Afghanistan, which is made up of ethnic minorities. From day one, we made it clear that in a country made up of ethnic minorities, an inclusive government isn't one political force dominating politics and others being in the margins. And one of the reasons why we believe we've been having unending conflict throughout Afghanistan's history is because of this. You see a zero-sum game over power in Kabul because power has always been concentrated in Kabul and in one position, which is back in the days it was the monarchy. In the past 50 years, it has been the presidency. And everyone has been fighting over this. The competition has been over one city and over one position. And unless you find another alternative, you'll have this unending conflict continue in Afghanistan's future. And what we're seeing today is, okay, you have the National Resistance Front as the only front and political group outside of the Taliban that is challenging Kabul at the moment. And then you see another power struggle over Kabul within the Taliban. You have at least 5 factions fighting over power. And this, in reality, justifies our points when we raise our points that Afghanistan's problems, underlying problems, go back to a few centuries. It doesn't start with Bonn. It doesn't start with 1992. It doesn't start with 1978. It's just we've been seeing patterns throughout Afghanistan's history. And in order to solve these problems, the formula and the political solution that we've been proposing is, in order for us to solve this unending conflict, we have to address this problem that power cannot be concentrated in Kabul if we want peace, harmony, and stability in Afghanistan's future. If we want not only the internal conflict in Afghanistan to end, but even the external problems, the regional rivalries, the problems that we see between many countries in the region, it's all because power is concentrated in one city and in one person. So the political solution that we proposed, whether it was before August 15th, and what we stand for today, whether it's through negotiations in the future, there is no good negotiations right now, but if there is ever an opportunity to solve this problem through talks and negotiations, if ever Taliban and their sponsors are sincere, or through armed struggle, through a resistance, is to establish a decentralized state where Kabul receives, where the center receives legitimacy from the peripheries, not the other way around, which has existed for the past few centuries. It's time to give the people a chance to be able to decide their future, to determine their future. And for us to empower the local level of governance and the provincial level of governance will allow everyone to see themselves in the power structure, will solve the whole zero-sum game that we're seeing throughout Afghanistan's future, and will allow the general population to prevent those individuals that many have mentioned that have monopolized power in Kabul and have allowed a corrupt class, political class, to monopolize power and to manipulate the general population. It will empower the people It will allow the people to see themselves in the power structure. So this is the type of inclusive government that we're envisioning for Afghanistan's future. And we believe this is the only way to reach inclusivity. Inclusivity doesn't mean making someone prime minister or giving a few ministries or having a cabinet that has a percentage of every ethnic group. This is not inclusivity to us. So our vision for Afghanistan is clear. When it comes to India, we've always mentioned that one of the best examples for Afghanistan in the future is to learn from India's example, India's experiences throughout history. Afghanistan, like India, is a multicultural state. It's not a nation state. We have different identities in the country. We have different cultures. We have different religions, sects. And so nationalism doesn't work in our country. The only way forward in Afghanistan to solve many of these identity problems, many of these, to prevent the deepening of these social cleavages, whether it's sectarian, ethnic, and so forth, is to adopt multiculturalism, is to endorse and adopt cultural and political pluralism as the formula to move forward. So, and then the political system of India. So the federal system or the decentralized system that India has, we believe something similar like this, or something similar that exists in many other countries, could be good experiences and examples that Afghanistan could learn from and could implement. And we've never given this chance in Afghanistan. There's many critics. We have listened to these critics throughout the past 20 years, even before that decentralization will never work in Afghanistan. But we've tried centralization, we've tried a unitary system for the past 300 years, and it has constantly failed. Why should we keep experiencing something that has failed and not give something that hasn't been experienced in Afghanistan a chance? And so this is what the National Resistance Front is fighting for. We are not fighting, we are not resisting to continue a war in Afghanistan, to continue violence. If there is a viable path to peace in Afghanistan today, when we've experienced this many times, we're willing to lay down our arms. But when we see that one political force, which is a minority, tries to dominate power, this is unacceptable to the majority in Afghanistan. And today we see a terrorist group that has ties with other terrorist groups and is sponsored by a neighboring country take over most of the country, is terrorizing many communities, is forcefully removing people from their villages and provinces, is starting a process of genocide. How are we supposed to lay down our arms and believe that resistance cannot continue through these means? So I would like to thank all of you again, and I'm open to any questions. I would like to end with a comment. I forgot to answer your question, which is the resistance is continuing today. We have groups throughout the country for the past few months because people have realized that the Taliban cannot establish stability throughout the country. This isn't a stabilizing force in the country. Actually, it is going to lead to more instability, to more problems, whether it's social, political, economic. They're looking for ways. And one alternative is to join the National Resistance Front, which is the only front right now that is looking for the interests of all of Afghanistan citizens, that is fighting for every citizen in the country, that is fighting for everyone's freedom, everyone's rights, and for the preservation of the republic and of the democracy. So this is the only option that the people have. There's many other options, which is a much more destabilizing force for Afghanistan's future, but the only option right now that is appealing to the mass population is the National Resistance Front, because we are looking for ways to stabilize the situation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Mr. Nazary, in a sense, you've broadened the debate a little bit, because you're not saying that the answer to the situation we see today in Afghanistan is simply to have another government. It is to actually change the way Afghanistan has been. And of course, a lot of what you said about India, I'm not sure from inside India, we feel India is yet a very federal structure or has yet rationalized its relationship with all its various multicultures. But we certainly would like to strive in that direction, as I know so many Afghans would. The National Resistance Front was discussing a political settlement with the Taliban. Given the situation today, do you think India should actually engage the Taliban further, normalize it, as they say, or legitimize it? Or should India hold what it has said so far, that they will not engage with a government that has not got the legitimacy that the previous government had? Where do you stand on that?
So, first of all, I would like to point out that Afghanistan isn't an independent country at the moment.
Right.
Afghanistan has lost its independence. It's a protectorate of another country at the moment. It's dependent on another, it has lost its foreign relations. The group that is controlling most of Afghanistan today, the Taliban, they do not have an independent foreign policy. They cannot decide on foreign policy. It's a bit akin to what we experienced in Afghanistan in the late 19th century, up to 1919, when the British Raj was deciding foreign policy for the rulers of Kabul. And we're seeing a repeat of that today. Since August 15th, 2021, most of the country has been taken over by a group that cannot be considered a government, hasn't been recognized even by their closest supporter, and they cannot manage foreign policy all by themselves. They're not one side of the argument is that they're incompetent. They're just a few illiterate, uneducated mullahs trying to run the affairs of a country. On the other side, they're a proxy of another country. And we see Afghanistan as an occupied country today, except for the areas that we control. The rest of the country is occupied by another country. Afghanistan has lost its freedom, has lost its independence, and the territorial integrity of Afghanistan has been lost, because we saw that firsthand during the operation against Panjshir in late August, early September. There were elements, non-Afghanistan elements on the front fighting us, trying to take over Panjshir. Fortunately, they were unable to take all of Panjshir, only the main road, but there were elements of other countries inside Afghanistan trying to subdue the National Resistance Front. So the problem with this question is we don't believe the Taliban can manage foreign policy because it's controlled in another country, in another capital, and whatever they dictate, the Taliban will follow their policies.
All right, but can I also ask you, Ali Nazary, are you disappointed that India has not done more to support the National Resistance Front, as it once worked with your, Commander Massoud, worked with other leaders of what became the Northern Alliance? Are you disappointed that India has not been more supportive?
Well, I've expressed this numerous times, that the National Resistance Front is thankful to the international community, especially our allies, for preventing the recognition of a terrorist group as Afghanistan's government, as Afghanistan's representatives. One. Two, I believe just how we're in shock at the moment, even though we're almost in the third month and the shock isn't over. The region is also in shock. So we cannot judge things at the moment. I believe we need time to pass and then judge who did what and why.
So the fact that there's no recognition yet is a cause for you for some hope for you.